Okay, Mr. John Chmaj, thank you so much for joining.
Hey.
You are the first person to trial out this little podcast experience for the CAM Best Practices group. So maybe I'll start off with letting you introduce yourself for those who don't know you.
Okay. Hey, everybody. I'm John Chmaj. I am currently the Senior Director for Go-to-Market for Variant Knowledge Management. I've been doing that for quite some time. I've been in knowledge management, as I like to tell people, before there was an internet, because we used to make CD-ROMs with knowledge bases and put them on DOS machines and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I've been privileged to have a ringside seat at the evolution of knowledge management and been involved in a lot of important initiatives like the KCS initiative initially. And now, right now, the most exciting stuff is we're trying to figure out how to work in artificial intelligence and machine learning and multi-channel information. My specialty is in support and service. I started out on the call center taking calls, and I was given the knowledge base very early on to work with, like I said, back when it was a DOS application. So I've seen a lot of interesting things in the knowledge management domain. And Scott, you and I hooked up, I want to say around 2005 or so. We started doing things, working together, both in companies and now out. So it's been fun to watch the industry evolve and watch your role evolve as well. So I'm really pleased that we're trying to build KM community here, because that's really super important. It was what attracted me to the consortium in the first place, and it's super important that we share ideas. Interestingly, knowledge management professionals tend to be open to sharing information. You know, we used to joke about the fact that there is no sales consortium or marketing consortium, because those people couldn't possibly sit in a room and respectfully listen to each other. They're too busy trying to make their nut. So I think knowledge management, and in particular support and service knowledge management, is a unique domain where we can share information across lots of organizations and be really transparent with each other. And that's why I think what you're doing, Scott, trying to develop these podcasts and some of the community stuff you've done is really fun and makes KM compelling for people. So other than that, I live here in Sammamish, Washington. If you look out the window right now, it's snowing outside.
Awesome.
As everybody knows, the snow is constantly in Seattle. No, it doesn't. But I was just outside playing in the snow myself, and I'm just sitting down here in my office. I am a recovering musician. I have 2 degrees in music, and I played a lot for a living earlier in my life. Do you want to ask what's on my wall? I'll tell you what's on my wall.
Yeah.
Okay, so part of my self-actualization exercise is doing these collages you see here, right? So there's a collage there, a collage there. There's other collages. Up here are artworks that I've improvised music to by various artists, from Paul Cézanne to Klee, Kandinsky, Monet.
Awesome.
So I'm really interested in the intersection of art and music. So I've been doing a lot of shows on that. Also climate action shows where we take nature videos and set them to very specific music to evoke the energies of nature. So that's what I'm into.
Awesome.
What else can I tell you?
Well, since you mentioned when we first met each other, one of the things I'm trying to do is just sort of reboot those knowledge sharing days that we used to do at Evergence. You know, you and Steve Ray and Alan Bondi and some others. And like you mentioned, I had come from a little bit different sort of role where you would go to a conference and you'd hear somebody speak to you about all these things, but it wasn't super collaborative versus, you know, the first one of those that we did, I just loved it because it was like 4 or 5 different clients, and I think a couple other non-clients who happened to be in the area, and everybody was just so willing to share. And so that's, you know, why I'm wanting to do this, because I happen to be in that sales arena where, you know, it's a fun job to try to get to help people. But with this project, it's really allowed us to explore a lot of different topics, you know, with no real agenda other than let's just talk about interesting things. And, you know, I don't say a whole lot during the webinars we hosted, but I learn a ton, you know, just from helping to facilitate. So I really appreciate you doing this, and thanks for sharing your personal background, because, you know, that was one of my favorite things about working together is we'd leave the knowledge workshop and we go out to eat, and then I'd get the musical workshop from you. So that was always fun. maybe if you don't mind, I'm going to go off of the script a little bit of the questions I had prepared. And I remember you saying this many years ago, but it kind of slipped my mind recently. Tell me a little bit more about those knowledge bases on CD-ROMs, right? I mean, some people that may watch this might need a refresher, the younger generation, of what a CD-ROM is, and specifically, the size limitations. And,
do I have one lying around here? I'm sure I do. So back in the days, young'uns, there was no internet. It was a dark and lonely place. But then the light came, and computers were invented. And the personal computer originally had a hard disk, which they still do. My first computer had a 20 megabyte hard disk, and everybody was jealous that I had a 20 megabyte hard disk. My photos are larger than that today. So, so that was where we were starting. But the one thing you could do that would store at that time a lot of information was taking like a CD, you get a CD from you guys. I'm laughing, but nobody, people haven't seen a rotary telephone. People don't know what this stuff is. So, you got a CD. It's a CD of some music a friend of mine and I made. And this could hold about 660 megabytes of information. And nowadays you can compress it and play games, but it's not like a DVD, which can hold gigabytes of information. This can only hold 660 megabytes, which, believe it or not, was a huge amount of data at the time. And when I first started, not only was it that antiquated, we had to go in this special like IBM computer room with the tape things rolling in the clean room. And you had to get on this High Sierra machine, which was like a big tape drive. And it basically, you would get your files and chuck them onto this drive and get them all ordered on this tape that would roll. And then you'd run it to a candidate copy and check it and do all this kind of production stuff. When we first got our CD-ROM burning software, which was software that allowed you to actually go on the computer and visualize and put your files in, that was a big deal. That software was $3,000 and we were glad to pay it. I mean, the software would be a nickel today. So back then it was really hard to make CDs. And so we would build a knowledge base on it. And we had a little Boolean search tool called Bluefish. And it was a hardy little tool. You could get in there and search and find stuff. And I backed into this because I had a master's in writing about music, and so I could write really well. So when I got into phone support, as anybody who's ever done phone support, the number one goal in phone support is to get off the phones. It's your number one goal. So I started writing to get off the phones. And I wrote all these technical notes. And then, they put me in charge of the knowledge base. And now we had to figure out how to get all this stuff on the knowledge base. Interesting anecdote. Around that time, I had about 1,000 customers that I would mail this to. This was Lotus Development Corporation. They used to make a product called 123 that got, Microsoft ate all the spreadsheets, but 123 actually had 85% market share at that time. It was the spreadsheet everybody used. And so Lotus was rocking and rolling in the late 80s. And we used to have 1,000 customers we'd send this knowledge base to. And it was very cool for that time because you could actually look up questions and answers. And the problem space was simpler back then. There was one shining day in 1989. I remember it was a Tuesday and the sun was shining when I knew everything there was to know about my product, including all the way down to the BIOS of the computer. I could just, when the phone rang, I was fearless, like anything this guy's going to ask me, I'm going to know. And then Windows came along. And there was this file that went on top called the win.ini file. And we were all toast because now any customer could muck with that and God knows what they would do. So it was sort of a primitive time. So the anecdote is I was pitching getting these CD-ROMs to another whole group, this new group we had acquired called Lotus Notes. I don't know if that ever went anywhere. But anyway, Lotus Notes, they had this big group that came in and got acquired by Lotus, and I was coming in pitching this CD-ROM thing, and I was in this room, people doing a demo, saying, hey, you could type on this, and you could search text, and they said, well, who would ever want to do that? Now, I should be on a yacht, because I saw it immediately, like this is where it's all going, right? So those were the old days, Scott, when knowledge management was not even a thing, people didn't even know they were doing it. And software was so crude that doing it was laborious all by itself. So it's been an interesting journey to be able to get involved with that from that time forward. And I had a bunch of other interesting adventures at Lotus in search. So I was fortunate, without a college degree in computer science or anything, to sort of learn by doing in the contact center.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember everything from putting in the multiple floppy disks to install
Yeah.
a program to, going back to CD-ROMs, it's like the Britannica encyclopedia, right? You might be reading halfway through a story on one CD, and then you'd have to change it out to go to the next one versus, I talk to a lot of clients and prospects, and this is common in the KCS discussions around maintaining the freshness of a knowledge base article. And I'm just trying to compare and contrast in my mind the difference between flagging or editing a knowledge base article today versus you'd already shipped the CD-ROM to those 1,000 customers. They've already received them, installed them, that sort of thing. And now you need to change one sentence of that 600 and so megabytes.
Yep.
It certainly puts today's challenges into
Well,
perspective.
it made KCS radical. KCS showed up on my desktop. My boss, I was in his office and the fax was rattling. Any of you who remember fax machines, the fax rattled off this little document from what was called the Customer Support Consortium, which didn't exist yet, but they proclaimed it, tried to get us to all come to a meeting. And the idea that you could capture knowledge in real time. For those who were interested, were practitioners of this, that was very exciting, but it was hard to visualize how it would be done. I mean, to amplify your point. So we finally did all meet in Seattle for this first meeting, and we got in the meeting room. Anybody who's in the who listened to this, who's part of the consortium history, knows Melissa George. So Melissa George and I were in that room, the very first meeting. And the engineer from the company, which was called Symbologic, that was trying to do this KCS thing, SCS at the time, Solution Center Support, he gets out an overhead projector. Now, those of you who might be old enough to have gone to high school with overhead projectors may remember what they are, with these big clunky things with a magnifier, and you put a transparency on it, right? And this is how we used to sell. We would bring our overhead projectors to accounts and hold them. This is our PowerPoint. So he does this thing I've never seen before since. The head engineer takes a blank transparency, nothing on it, puts it on the projector, and he looks at all of us. There's about 30 of us in the room from all these different companies. He goes, "What do you want?" That blew my mind. I mean, and he meant it. And we started talking about it. It needs to support the troubleshooting process. You need to be able to turn up knowledge around immediately, blah, blah, blah. And he said, okay. So he went away and he came back with some dorky looking thing that they clearly had already built. And so they said, well, one day later, right, they come back with software. So here's what we were thinking. And we went, no, too clunky. Can't do the things we said, capture knowledge in real time, turn it all around, give feedback, structure while you're working, blah, blah, blah. We went, oh, okay. And not long afterwards, they showed up with Solution Builder, which was KCS product. I mean, so I'd never seen it done that way before. Requirements before development. I mean, what a concept. So anyways, I thought you'd appreciate little anecdotes there. The overhead projector was a real weird deal, right? You had to be an artist to be able to, draw on it while you were talking. Anyway,
yeah, and even if somebody doesn't,
old days.
Even if somebody doesn't remember, wasn't around for the CD-ROM or the floppy disk days, it wasn't that long ago that, for example, the Dell laptop was shipping with the knowledge base already installed on the laptop, right? You just went to go do a search, and it was searching the local hard drive. Maybe tell me a little bit. You and I have discussed this story, but while you're on the topic of, give us the early history of the consortium, because a lot of people that have been around for a while are very well aware of how involved you were in creating that, sort of first draft of KCS.
Well, I'm glad to have the opportunity to tell you, Kelly Murray recently interviewed me for the 30th anniversary of the consortium. She asked the same question, and getting a chance to talk about it reminded me of how interesting to me the whole process was. So the company that was trying to start Solution Center Support was a company called Symbologic, little software company out of Seattle. I got really attracted to that. I finagled my way over to Seattle from Boston and got my job there. Okay. And very soon after that, I became employee number 3 in the consortium, because there was a little gal there named Shelley Benton, who was just a powerhouse, who was bringing this together, really making it happen. So I worked with her a lot. And then the idea was that this company, which then, changed its name to the testosterone-laden Primus, right? Symbologic was this happy little company where we're in Seattle and we walk around Belltown, and every every Tuesday, somebody got to be Lunch King, and you put a Burger King crown on, and you got to choose a place. And I was relatively new to Seattle, but I chose this great Jamaican jerk place. And that was like my biggest claim to fame, was that I found this new restaurant in Belton. So it was that kind of a fun, friendly, right? I was employee 45, we're like, employee 39 at that one. And but then, everybody wants to make money. The venture capitalists, the CEO, blah, blah, blah. We're going to be Primus and we're going to take over the world. And the way the consortium was supposed to work was, pretty Machiavellian. And I hope this is not too much detail for you, but we have the podcast, get the chance to tell the story. I think this is the story. Anybody wants to know. So then Primus decided, well, what, the head of marketing there, a fellow named Craig Chellis, these people deserve to be named. Craig Chellis came up with the idea for Solution Center Support. Just the nugget of an idea. He had no idea how to do it. He just saw that support organizations talk to customers and they could create content. That was his fundamental intuition. And so the idea was, well, we're going to build a product, like I told you, with the overheads and transparencies, and then the consortium will be the instant market. It was really kind of our version of American Idol, because to me, American Idol is nothing more than a marketing exercise. We're going to put up 10 people, we're going to invest all this money in you guys watching that show and voting, so that when we're done and we pick the idol, we've automatically going to sell 1 million records because 1 million people watch the show.
Yeah.
It's the same concept. Let's build something that meets what you think you guys said you want. And that's an instant market for this product. It's a fairly brilliant idea if you can pull it off. But they had one little problem. We all had our own ideas about how we wanted this product to work. And they were successful in their marketing through Shelley. And they got all the big hitters in here, Microsoft, and early on IBM for a little while, Dell, Compaq, companies that don't even exist anymore, Nortel, a bunch of big heavy hitters came in saying, yeah, we'll invest some time. It's the late 90s, the dot-com boom is happening. There's money to spend. And so we'll invest time in sorting this out. And then the consortium, we realized we actually have to build something here. We have to build a methodology that works. And at that time, in the mid 90s, they hired Livia Wilson out of Legent in Virginia. And we used to have our meetings, oftentimes have it at the real snazzy, nice hotel downtown, not snazzy, but right on the water, the Edgewater, famous for the Beatles fishing off of it. But it had this beautiful open glass window in the conference room to the Puget Sound. And she came in and presented her stuff from Legent. And I was like, she had peanut butter to my chocolate. I was like, I'm like a content management guy. I know the ins and outs. She had studied a little bit with Peter Drucker. She understood the business aspect of it, and it fit. And we went out to dinner that night, and we walked along the pier. Little did I know, I was actually convincing her to move to Seattle, because I'm telling her, oh, that's cool stuff. I've lived here a while, blah, blah, blah. She told me years later, yeah, I moved because you told me to. I was like, well, this is not, I don't know if that happened, but good thing you did. So she came over and she joined the staff, and then we had a conference. We had that was about our fourth conference. I want to say 1996, Scottsdale, Arizona, might have been 97. And Shelley and I made Livia a star. We said, okay, we're going to get up there. She was so brilliant about what she was talking about. We said, we're going to let her present the main Solution Center Support idea in front of the whole, like 150 people in the room, right? And she that was it. She was on her way. She started her own consultancy and started building it. But then we had already started trying to build Solution Center Support as a methodology through the meetings, the working groups of the consortium, which every quarter, back in those days, we would meet every quarter on site together someplace. And you know how Greg Oxton liked to do it. Beautiful places, smart people, good ideas. So we went to all these really exotic places all over the nation. One little fun fact, Solution Center Support, the model with the circle and whatnot, was initiated in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Right before Livia joined, I ran a couple of consortium Solution Center Support meetings by myself. And we were just groping in the dark, right? You got a bunch of people at the table, what do you want to do? And out of desperation on the flip chart, I said, well, all right, fine. Here's the process of writing knowledge. I write a circle. Okay, what do you first do? Well, we capture some information. Okay, so anyone have, well, then we've got to, structure it, blah, blah, blah. And, we had 4 of them in the initial, not 8. There's 4 of them. And they kind of like that. And then I made up the little triangle with the triangles. And then we decided what that meant. It was sort of, we were designing a religion. It turns out the symbol for the Knowledge Center service is actually an ancient yantra. And I should show it. Maybe we can superimpose it later on if you want folks to see it. It's a thousands of year old symbol of knowledge, believe it or not. So,
awesome.
So we did all this stuff. And then Livia and I were chartered to write the first paper. And I'm just going to tell you guys, it's 30 years later, I got nobody to worry about saying these stuff. But but we were right in the jaws of a dilemma. Primus over here was actually looking to leverage this thing to make money and lock it down so that only their product could do the thing that they wanted. Meanwhile, we've got Inference, which became eGain, Knowlex, HP, Microsoft. There's like 10 big vendors and some smaller knowledge vendors in the meeting going, you guys better not make this so that it's like vendor dependent on Primus. You guys need to be fair. And then so Olivia and I worked really hard to get that going and get that. And then they would say, oh, that's benefiting Primus. You can't do that. It needs to be more general. And so we pull it back to being, and we slowly molded that in. And then we had one meeting where the sales VP from Primus dressed us down. We went in the meeting, Olivia and I. It's like, this stuff is too generalized. It's not going to be, our product will not succeed. And we're like, yeah, well, our members want this. And they're like, blah, blah, blah. And they make their vague threats. We just shrugged and went back in the room because what do we, So, at this point, I was chain smoking cigarettes. I don't even smoke. I was like, it was pretty stressful because there were guys from Primus going, this is going to cost us $1 million to create this paper. We better sell software, blah, blah, blah. But it was really interesting, right? Because there's all these dynamics going on. And over time, this group bonded. There were I want to say about 18 of us in that group, Solution Center Support. I think it took about 18 months. I have to check. It took about 1.5 years for us to hammer this down to where it really was a methodology we thought had legs, and sift through it and throw out the junk and go back and forth and figure it out. So that first Solution Center Support paper, which I have right down here, keep it close by my side. It's in the office. This is the first Solution Center Support paper. It's in something called a binder. Those of you younger people may not remember these things. It's got something in it called paper. And we used to write on this and then you read it. I know it sounds kind of weird. And they had all these tabs. This was the thing, right? And so
do you have that on CD?
yeah. Very good. Touche. I don't want to go on and on about it, but I think for those people that want to understand it, then now that did create an instant audience for it, right? By the fact that we created that with members of the consortium. We're all listed here in the front. Geez, there's like 25 people on this thing after 1.5 years, right? Some people that I'm still friends with. So we developed that, but then just to go a little bit farther, people started to try to implement it. And we made all the mistakes that people still talk about as they, I consider that we're in the third generation of consortium membership. First generation was these folks I'm talking about. That went along until about the mid 2000s or early 2000s when we developed the adaptive organization, which we called Betty. That's another whole story. Mm-hmm. I was in on that one. And then that second generation showed up. New companies, new people, new faces. That lasted till, I don't know, mid 2010s, somewhere in there. And I think there's another whole generation that's come along. So this is kind of first generation thinking.
Yeah.
And we had to figure out what tools to use and how to make stuff work. And so much of it has been programmatically clarified now. But anyway, kind of like CD-ROM, it was kind of crude to start with. Everybody had the right intuitions. One side note, just while we're on this topic, is the consortium at that time was running 2 other programs that folks may not be aware of. Greg Oxton mentioned all this in his 30th anniversary history of the consortium. Alongside of the knowledge management solution center support strategy, our customers, the members, wanted to have a multi-vendor collaboration strategy. In the late 90s, the internet still wasn't so prevalent that you could just share instantly and embed yourself in each other's applications. They wanted to figure out a business model for collaborating. So, for example, let's say you've got a Dell computer and you're running over Microsoft Windows, and you're on some kind of network, with the Cisco network, and you're going to a HP computer, and you can't print. Well, what is it? Is it your application? Is it your operating system? Is it your network? Is it the printer? And the problem is that all these people were, customers were calling all over the place, and then escalating service tickets, and now vendors are trying to figure out vendors. And there was something at the time called TSA Net, which was kind of a nice basic clearinghouse, but only for a smaller set of vendors. So we developed this whole multi-vendor support strategy. Alongside of that, the third working group that I ended up running for 6.5 years was the Solution Exchange program. If you're going to have vendors collaborating to create incidents and knowledge objects together, then you need to have a data schema that allows you to share these knowledge objects. And I got chartered to run the solution component of that. And Kurt Samuelson, my friend who worked at Microsoft or still works there, lives down the street from me here. He did the incident exchange because it's also like, how am I going to pass incidents across applications?
Yeah.
And this was really good work that we did. I mean, 6.5 years, your computer down at the guts of it, we put some of the exchange elements back deep inside the web interface inside of Microsoft Windows. There's actually some exchange components. It took us a long time to farm that in. And by the time we got it built, it was kind of obsolete because everybody would just do stuff over the internet. So they didn't care. But the interesting bit about the solution exchange standard for any knowledge geeks out there was, so imagine I've got the free text search guys, right? That just search anything. We don't care what the data is. Then I've got people that want more like solutions like solution center support, vetted solutions with, symptom, cause, fix. Then I got another class of vendors that do decision tree stuff. At the time, there were vendors that just sold pure decision trees. So they want these things linked and blah, blah, blah. Then you got one other class, which is emerging called case-based reasoning, which is still a thing with some products where I've got all these different conditions between my statements. Every one of those vendors insisted that the exchange standard allow one tool that could have one set of structures to exchange the solutions that would go back into the other tool and be sensible to it. It's a really interesting knowledge problem, right? And at one point there was a company called Serviceware. They got eaten by Canisa, I think, in 2005, right? And so at one point, Bob from Serviceware, he's so worn down on this thing. He goes, all right, I don't care if we say that the standard is there's a box called stuff and inside it is our stuff. And I that's all I want. I give up. So anyway, those are, again, sort of war stories from the back. But so the consortium did a lot of really innovative work early on. We didn't quite meet the market in the sense of those things sort of fell out of favor. But I think a lot of that thinking was still relevant. And, the multi-vendor business to business challenge is still here. I mean, people still haven't sorted that out.
So no, I totally agree with your 3-generation classification, right? Because I feel like I came in around the 2nd generation and I had observed that, you all had been doing this for a while and it was starting to gain traction. But now, by the 3rd generation, you're seeing, KCS was rebranded from support to service, and you're just seeing a ton more traction with the idea as it sort of crosses the chasm or whatever analogy, you want to use. So it's been really interesting to get the history of sort of that early stage and then live through some of the mid cycle and now see, even the late adopters entertain the idea. And I think it's awesome that, it was a methodology because that obviously outlived that one individual software company, right? As many do, similar to, the PMI and PMP for project management and that sort of thing. So, one of the things I was wanting to ask you about is culture shifts. So you've talked about, some of the stuff from clear back in the day, but what are you seeing recently? Are you seeing cultures being more open to the types of change that's required to, share knowledge rather than hoard knowledge, that sort of thing? And I totally respect that because, you and I, when we met, we're billing by the hour, right? And I had this sort of passion for sharing knowledge while also realizing that if I put all my knowledge on the CD-ROM, then whether I get hit by a bus or laid off, I might not be, missed, right? And so can you talk a little bit about, let's say over the last couple of years, some culture shifts that you've seen, and then those that you think still need to happen in the next few years to make organizations successful?
Here lies Scott. He was one of us. We kind of liked him, but he got hit by a bus.
But he documented too much.
Okay. My joke has cost me the memory of what you asked me. No, seriously, you want to know about
culture shift? Yeah.
Well, so my work situation is drifted away from the collaborative kind of thought process that we might have had back then. This late majority thing is a factor in my business. Verint sells to a lot of financial institutions, healthcare organizations, utilities, some telco, some retail. But what I'm about to say will hopefully make sense to you. a lot of those organizations have two attributes that sort of work against collaborative knowledge building. One is they're heavy, compliant, legal driven. You can't let some guy amend a solution about adjusting a defibrillator in a healthcare environment, so the approval loops are so baked into the way they do stuff that organizations can still do KCS for sure, but it has to be well understood, and you can't just go all in on it and just get all zealous about it. It has to be well vetted, and there are forces that be in these organizations that are really sensitive to this. So that's one big thing. The other thing about those organizations, a lot of them are highly transactional. They have 5, 10, 15, 20,000. I've got a customer with 160,000 support agents. I mean, they're answering repeat calls. Imagine a bank. What's my balance? When does my bill due? Blah, blah. There's no knowledge, reuse, updating scenario there. I call that a bushy problem set. It's like a bush. All the problems just are really short and the same. It's not like tech support or where someplace where there's a product that might have 25 different flavors of one bug, and so as people discover that, we can advance it out and move out. So in those organizations, collaboration meant something different, and it was a challenge to go in there and try and tell that story to people because it was so different than the way they knew how to behave. Unfortunately, the worst thing that's happened to this whole collaboration idea is COVID. So we all went home. Now we don't have any kind of personal cultural hub. And I personally think the damage from that to our society is as yet to be understood. We have no, and there's huge social aspects to that too, right? There's just not gathering together, as much as we did. And I had a kid in high school during COVID. In fact, I had 2 kids in high school during COVID. One was starting, one was finishing. And those poor kids, man, they didn't get to go to dances and do even football games were weird, right? So my point is that everything's moved online. Let's look at that from that perspective. Okay, so now it's online. Now, there's a fellow in our company, John Allen. Some of you from the second generation will remember him. He worked with Livia for her consultancy early in the 2000s. Great knowledge management guy, KCS consultant back in the day. He became general manager of a company called Telligent that makes a rocking community product. And we were savvy enough to acquire that company. So John and I now get a chance to work together again. And he and I believe that these community apps like Telligent or whatnot, mixed with good knowledge management practices, is a real exciting scenario. Because the community products are they've got the collaboration baked in. They're made for people sharing information and rating information and tacking on little comments to each other guys' stuff. From the community perspective, original knowledge management looks a little bit like the CD-ROM does to somebody who's using the internet today. It's like, okay, you had to link to a case because that's the only way you could collaborate. You have to do the case, then I do a case, then you read it, then you collaborate, you bring it around. In the community, it's all right there. Yeah. The object's in the middle and everybody's collaborating however they feel like it. And then someone from the outside, the knowledge management side, can harvest and curate that stuff and feed the community with curated and verified information. But the molten stuff, which is the idea of capturing the workflow stuff, the draft solution, they sit in the community. I still think you asked about the future. I think that's where there's a natural fit. And John and I have been evangelizing this and trying to find places where we can engage with customers on this, because it's pretty exciting. I've got one right now. And they came in the front door through community. They didn't come through knowledge management. They built a big knowledge base, 11,000 objects in community. And then they went, oh, this really isn't a very good knowledge base. No, it's got great content. They did great writing, but it doesn't do the kind of workflow and authoring things or reporting that you really need in a good knowledge base. But they understood collaboration. They understood their knowledge environment. So now we're working on them to say, okay, what can we do with knowledge management infused, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? Let the community be where the action is for collaboration. Let the knowledge base be where we stash stuff as we really vet it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, maybe around 2008. I don't recall if you're on this project, but Sprint was doing something somewhat similar where, to quote your phrase, which I really like, the action was kind of happening on, I think it was in a Jive community. but then we helped to build a process to bring that into a little bit more structure in the knowledge base. And so from a KCS standpoint, you could either, create a new article, or better yet, you go find a discussion around the topic and you leverage what's already there, but then, add a little bit of structure, a little bit of official blessing to it and bring it in. And it's funny, as you're mentioning, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the communities as well, but I also, as you mentioned, understand it can get a little messy. But I had a, project with Research in Motion back in the day, and they did not want to do any communities or forums. And I was a big user of theirs. And I'm like, well, if you don't build it, your customer will. And I started to show them, you may recall this, because I remember you had a BlackBerry, there was blackberryforums.com, there was crackberryforums.com. And, I got a lot of bad information alongside the good. And a guy that I still really appreciate helped me translate what was correct out of a particular forum thread on a Bluetooth stack problem, but then added, a few corrections to it. And I was, on my way, versus if you followed the directions verbatim, it actually caused a fairly significant challenge. So yeah, I totally love that concept. What about, demographics are changing, right? And not only with support leaders, but I think more importantly, their customers are driving them more towards self-service. So, even besides COVID or before COVID, more people, of millennials and so forth. And even though I'm not a millennial, I certainly include myself in this camp. I do not want to call in, right? It's no offense to the person on the other side of the phone, but I'm usually dealing with the problem at 10 at night, after I've put the kids to bed or whatever. And I want to deal with the problem in my time availability, in the mechanism that I want to do so. And so are you seeing, that on your side as well? Finally, the customers are demanding the self-service. And going back to your example of, these sort of more regulated industries, I always use Fidelity as a great example. They're featured in, I can't remember, I think it was not the Challenger Sale book, but the Challenger Customer that came out of the CEB. And they talked about whoever would call in, if that capability that they're inquiring about existed on self-service, the agent would very politely ask them, hey, did you know that you can do this on self-service? And I actually experienced this. In one case, I said, yeah, but I'm a little nervous about doing it. So I thought if you handheld me, that'd be better. And they're like, yeah, that's totally fine. In another example, I was like, oh, I had no idea, because actually when I used to work at JP Morgan, we were told, you couldn't possibly do that self, on your own, versus, years later, now you can. I think it was maybe updating a beneficiary, right? Like there's some legal ramifications if you do it incorrect, but the 99% benefit outweighs the 1%. And so I was like, oh, wow, and they sent me the link to the document and the transaction and how to complete it. And that, really helped me channel shift to a process that's probably going to be more convenient for me, is definitely going to save them money, et cetera, et cetera. So I loved how this was studied in that book, and I actually experienced it myself. And then the third one that I always recommend my clients do is, and Fidelity just asked me this the other day. They said, hey, if we made this a self-service transaction capability, would you feel comfortable doing it, right? Because they may think that it's too complicated or that it's a perfect candidate for the customer to do themselves. But if the customers feel otherwise, it's a complete waste of time, money, et cetera. And so I just love that aspect. I guess to summarize, I see customers pushing the vendors on self-service more than the vendors being ahead of that problem. Am I alone, or do you see that as well?
Well, you said a couple things. Do I see digital first being the trend? No question about it. I mean, we've reoriented our entire offering, including knowledge management, the community product, the chat product, the social channels product, around an umbrella called digital first.
Okay.
It's what the market expects. Not only does it expect these digital interfaces, it expects them to integrate with each other. So that if I start out with you on some kind of a chat, and then you throw me to a knowledge object, it should persist the context of what I discussed. And then if I need to go in and talk to somebody or chat on a community with the real person,
Yeah.
that gets persisted. So no question, that's ubiquitous, and that's where things are going. And that's the expectation. The other interesting bit for knowledge management is the self-service paradigm challenges the foundational assumption of knowledge management, which from a knowledge management tool set perspective of what a session is, what context is, and how a user is expected to navigate these tools. And I'm going to unpack this. This is going to take a minute because it's important to understand the pieces of it. So, gosh, since we talked about the consortium, I remembered that we actually wrote this. If you look at the first couple of pages of the Betty model, I wrote this. I could go find it, about this idea that I have a context. My thing I like to use is upgrade my handset. By the way, this whole talk I'm going to give you right now is in response to what's fingernails on the blackboard for any knowledge vendor worth their salt, which is, why can't it be like Google? Yeah. Okay. So let me explain to you. This is what I call taking Google out back in the shed and shooting it in the head. All right. So, not that I'm going to say anything blunt.
Like the printer scene on Office Space movie.
Well, okay. So, let's talk about this a little bit. A user has a context of need. Okay. They don't know how to express it necessarily in the words they need. They don't even know necessarily what the problem is. In fact, they may not know anything except what's presented to them in front of them.
Yeah.
I have a member of my household who is mildly computer savvy. Compared to the average person, pretty computer savvy. But in terms of articulating problems, I normally get, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's the symptom I start with, right? So I have a whole presentation on this about search and Google and context. But here's the challenge. How do you render that context to the knowledge base in an intelligible form, given the format of the knowledge base being a search tool? Okay, so it's kind of like you remember in the 1920s they had these things called speakeasies where they would have the booze, right? But in order to get to the booze, you had to know the password, and so they built these doors with a little slider, and you'd open the slider. And in the Marx Brothers movie Horse Feathers, they say, "What's this password?" "Swordfish." Come on in. So swordfish, right? So think about a search engine. What's the size of the box you get to type in? Ain't much bigger than the speakeasy, and so you basically have to type in, you're encouraged to only type in 2 or 3 words. And many queries are 1 word. And so how much is that going to buy you for context, right? It's really difficult to have a session of this idea of a notion and absorbing your context. So there's 2 ways to advance this, to get out of this dilemma. Let me just finish with my little Google challenge, okay? Why can't it be like Google? I'm sorry I don't have my handset with me, but I normally hold up my iPhone. And I go, here's my iPhone. Have you ever tried to upgrade your handset? They got a new 5G, 20-inch phone, whatever the heck it is you want. You want to upgrade it, right? Pretty simple task. Okay, so I want to upgrade my handset. That means I need to know the model of the one I want. I need to know the features of my current handset. I need to know whether the new features map to the ones I want. I need to know if it's supported on the plan that I bought, along with, are there any promotions for that plan? Am I in contract or out of contract in terms of what that's going to cost me? Is it in stock and can I provision it? And what color do I get it in?
Yeah.
Okay, now do a Google query.
Yeah.
Go ahead. And my other thing I used to do when there were call centers, people won't remember this anymore now after COVID, but I would say, here's how Google works. I would say, you're all in the call center. We're all got these half-high cubes, right? When we're taking calls, and you stand up to your neighbor and you go, printer error.
Yeah.
And I've done this to people in workshops in front of everybody. I make them stand up. Printer error. It's the person who asked about Google that gets this honor. I said, printer error. And they say, yeah. Well, what about it? I said, well, printer error. Come on, I need the answer. I don't have a lot of time here.
Yeah.
Printer error. Well, what's the error? Oh, you want more information. Oh. So my point is, we've got to be able to articulate context. Well, what are the tools that have been successful with this? Well, the number one is chat. So we sell a really good IVA product. It's sophisticated, it's complex to model, but it works really well because it's got a little bit of AI in the back that can work a session with you and understand that you said handset up here, and then you said rate plan, and it remembers all that. But whether or not that tool does it or other tools do it, the most important thing about the IVA is you can get a conversation out of somebody and you can automate it. So I can get more than a one-word query. I can go back and get some symptoms and some other things. The other one I used to say about communities was in a community thread, all the customer brings in, or the community participant initially, if they're trying to solve a problem and not just chat randomly about some topic, is they bring in the context of their problem. And other people will jump in. Oh, well, is it this, are you using this? And have you installed that? And blah, blah, blah. And then oftentimes you'll see like 10, 20 of these things. And then bam, here's the answer. The answer is the easy part once you get the context figured out.
Yeah.
And so that's the interesting, and that's what good support agents do on the phone. They just get you right. It seems like magic. And like 3 or 4 of the right questions, boom, they got your answer because they know all the variables, right? And so from a standpoint of where we're going with these tools and self-service, back to the original question, the key thing with self-service is going to be capturing that context. Now, knowledge management is not out of the running because what we've got now is we can capture a lot of that context in the environment. We may know what product, especially if you log in. If you sign in, I know what product you have. I know what your account is. I know what you've done before. I know what you read. I've got a whole bunch of stuff I could draw from to precede, initiate, jumpstart whatever query you're going to type in. So this whole context is already bring stuff that's close to you. And then you just ask a little question. It's already within a much smaller circle, right?
Yeah.
Which leads to my other anecdote, since this is infotainment of a sort. Okay. Again, most of my great ideas came out of desperation in workshops when I was just like, the people in front of me were not reacting and I made stuff up. So this was back in Lotus days. Geez, this is probably 1993. I had this conversation. I was in this workshop, a bunch of support agents trying to teach them the knowledge base, right? And as you well know, sometimes the hardest sell for a new knowledge base are the old codgers that have been there since the building was built. They know every knowledge base article. There's a line out their cube. They're the geniuses, right? They're the least interested in changing this paradigm to where they suddenly don't know something or they don't know where to find something. So they were starting in on that with me, like, well, I really like to type in, KM 2694, and this whole abstract language. And I said, well, that's good. I said, but the problem is you're fishing with a gun. They said, what? I said, well, didn't you like to fish? I see you have a nice fine set of conducting wands on your wall there, Scott. Sounds like you like to either conduct orchestras or fish. But I said, well, fishing's fun, right? You really like to fish. So do you like to fish with a gun or a net? It's like a gun. I said, no, think about it. Now, if you bring a gun out in the boat, bam, you fire in, you hit the fish, dinner is served.
Yeah.
Only problem is how many times you have to fire the gun before you get the fish. Whereas a net will bring all the fish in front of you. My uncle Carmi did this to me in Florida. He took me out at midnight one night out to a bridge in the middle of nowhere off the Gulf of Mexico, threw a big net in the water and pulled out 50 fish. I was like stunned. I'd never caught anything bigger than that in my life. And he was, hell, Jacks. And he threw them all back. I went, what? He goes, well, we're looking for mullet. So my point about the gun versus the net is bring the context together, and then you can poke in with your query about what you want. Yeah. So in knowledge management, self-service, we're making more and more applications now that I think work that way. That can and then of course, customer, that's not enough. They want the knowledge base to pop while they're working. So while I'm working, if I've got something that indicates that there might be a knowledge object that would help me, proactively show it to me. Show me before you even have the question. Now we're talking, right? Now that's
I mean, as much as people, including myself, sometimes complain about the big brother aspect of, free services like Facebook. Like, why is it that, my next scroll automatically shows me an ad or a post about, something that I happen to be interested in about right now? It's because they do such a tremendous job of monitoring our contextual clues and our intents. And, one of the things that I got excited about a couple years ago is we were working on this thing called intelligent term detection, which I always say, despite having been a sales engineer at an NLP company, the only people who type in "how do I XYZ" into a search engine is the sales engineer given the demo, right? Because "how do I" gives very little information to the issue, whereas this intelligent term detection, you go back to the chat example, or I will go back to the chat example. We've all been there, whether it's on the agent side or doing it ourselves, where we present a tremendous amount of irrelevant information like I don't know, maybe I hate chat bots, or the weather's bad outside, or, I've been on hold for 20 minutes. And then I sort of get into the details of the situation. And then I maybe wrap it up with, I'm very angry or whatever it may be, And, some of our data scientists realize that, maybe just a first pass at an easy way to figure out what's important context and what's not is to cross-reference everything we got with the inquiry with how often do we see that in our cases and our content, right? So we only occasionally see somebody complaining about the weather or the hold time or whatever, versus when it gets down to, going back to your example of, upgrading handset from version X to version Y with, 1, 2, 3 requirements and, that sort of thing. Ooh, that's really interesting because we have a lot of case volume and a lot of content around that. So it's kind of an interesting way to get at, context. So I absolutely agree with you that I think you've said before, right? Content is king, context is the queen, and without the queen, what is a king?
Yeah, he doesn't have any children.
Yeah.
So, but seriously, what you just described to me is how the support agent's mind works.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you call to ask me about handset upgrade, let's just keep using that example. I already know, like in seconds, in milliseconds, what the likely scenarios are, what you're going to buy. Everybody wants the iPhone 10. Okay, I know that's already probably the likely option. I know that our company's got a promotion, so you may have called based on that. I know that we have X number in stock. I mean, I don't even need, they may go whatever direction, but the human mind is already assessing probabilities from previous information.
Yeah.
The way you just described that technology was very similar, which is, I may not know what you're asking about yet, but I know what the profile of my product set is in relation to all my customers. Mm-hmm. That's an exciting scenario that I would consider as more like real human reasoning.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, we all need to be good listeners, but to a certain point, you need to know what to kind of ignore and not get your axle, wrapped around the axle about versus what to drill in on. So, this is sort of an odd question coming from a guy in technology sales, but one of the things that I'm curious to get your perspective on is, at a highly oversimplified level, and then you can drill down onto it a little bit. What percentage of a KM program success relies on technology versus everything else, right? The methodology, the culture changes, leadership, et cetera. I mean, one of the things I tell my prospective clients is that, you probably can't do it without certain amounts of technology, at least to scale, right? We can't all have the 3-ring binder, knowledge base like you were using as an example with the original KCS spec. However, if you just do the technology without all those other things, then you're purely going to be partying with money and not seeing the results. So it's always something that's, a little odd at first for a sales guy to bring up, but, I feel very passionately about it because the programs I've seen be the most successful really focus on all of those areas, right? And how they all jive together. Because as an example, we both love, the software that we work with, but in some cases, one person's culture doesn't jive with a particular technology platform or vice versa. So maybe you could elaborate on your thoughts and observations in this regard, as well as most importantly, how somebody who may be watching or listening to this can sort of sell their team on the importance of these things, right? To avoid that, oh, let's just go buy XYZ software, and problem solved, right?
Yeah. Let me tell you what I try to explain to people, both in my company and in my customer base. Knowledge management has a unique quality to it in that the knowledge in the tool is your stuff. Okay, this tool is just a vessel for your stuff. It's a way of collecting and optimizing the user's experience and ability to find and navigate through your stuff. And so it's only going to be as good as your stuff. And the technology is going to only be as good as it can be activated. Now that at a high level sounds pretty logical. Here's where it gets more subtle. So if you just force me to create a percentage, I tell you 75% of knowledge management is business process and 25% technology. Okay. If you force me to a number, but it gets a little more subtle in that regard, because just to the point you were mentioning earlier about different cultures and different organizations, there's two different poles of this situation. One is, let's start with the technology pole. So different technologies fit different use cases, and they have different focal capabilities. For example, the technology in your organization does a huge job of aggregating a lot of various resources in lots of interesting ways. My product doesn't do that, but my product has a robust set of authoring tools and multi-channel delivery mechanisms. May or may not be in the other product. Neither is bad. They're just different pieces of the puzzle. And to get the most out of those technologies, you have to have a strong understanding of what that thing does and how you can put it to work for you, which means this is, the knowledge manager is so important in these organizations, because they sit at the intersection of the business, what the business is trying to do, the support environment, how you interact with customers, what channel, what kind of customers they are, blah, blah, and the technology and the content. They sit at if you don't have someone like that you're talking to, you're gonna have a harder time making it clear how your products differentiate. I had a roundtable just before Thanksgiving with a customer I'm working with. They're looking to buy software, and they brought their whole knowledge team into the room, right? And they asked really hard questions about how to organize their information and stuff, which was so encouraging, because they had at least taken the time to think about the problem. I had a call this morning with a software prospect who's being run by their IT organization. Guess how that went? What's your security protocol? What kind of servers do you use? I mean, it's like absolutely everything but knowledge management. Okay, so you need to be able to use the tools properly to sculpt the kind of experience you want. But on the end user pole, on the other side, on the business side, there are equal challenges. And the problem that I have, and I've given this analogy and I've been told it may or may not be exactly right, but my view was, when organizations start with knowledge management, they're already faced with the endless amount of information they've already generated, whether it's in SharePoint, on a file share, in a website, on somebody's hard drive. I mean, this is part of what we were challenged with at the very beginning of center support back in the 90s. How do we evolve a vision of that stuff that transcends all this stuff? Well, what's the problem with that in relation to this conversation? The problem is that not only is that stuff possibly redundant, duplicative, out of date, hard to find, stuffed in different repositories, it also, more importantly for this conversation, is formatted in ways that don't really match what you're trying to do with it when you get a real power tool, right? When you get a power tool like a knowledge management system, and even enterprise search, as you guys deal in, is only as good as the content it brings back, right? So, but here's the not so subtle thing. Organizations get conditioned to that format of information. And so now to try to move them to another dimension of thinking is really difficult. I was at KM World a couple of weeks ago, and I just got stuck I just got randomly put on a presentation hour with Seth Early from the Early Group. It's like an old, long-standing knowledge management guy. And it was really cool because my presentation was about omni-channel, digital first stuff. And then he came on and talked about how to do it. It was like perfect. It's like as if we had planned it. But in his stuff, he talks quite a bit about structuring the information and tagging the information. And his argument, which I thought was really interesting, is not only was that important up to now, but you guys that all want to do AI and fancy calculations against your content have to get this story straight, because there is no AI without IA, without information architecture. And he's got a whole spiel on that. He's just finished a book. Very interesting. Here's the problem on the content side with the customer. They get married to their conception about how this information needs to be done. Here's a concrete example of my current business pain. I've got a customer who does a lot of transactional, detailed sort of policy types of customer interactions. In their previous knowledge environment, they decided the best thing to do was to build these long procedure documents with little show hides to show the different conditions by the state or by the type of policy. And so their people have gotten used to reading thousands of these show hide little documents, right? So that wasn't working so great, but it was good enough. But then for other business reasons, they came and they bought Verint. So now we come in, and the sales guy knows me. He goes, John, you're going to want to break this stuff up and make it useful, blah, blah, blah. And, it was clear to me I was going to have a civil war in my hands, right? The Cultural Revolution, if I start on this now. They have slowly but surely jacked us over to making sure we can do all those little bits and bobs with their 27-page documents so that they can do that in the knowledge tool. It's like driving a Ferrari in first gear, right? They want to go, and so I hope that example resonates for anybody watching this around the fact that the thing you need to look for, here's a guidance to people trying to do this. What are the implicit assumptions your organization has about what knowledge is based on the tools you use today? What do they assume it's like a decision tree format? Do they assume everything has to be in it? They assume that, all kinds of background information has to be in it. I went to a bank in Scotland, God, I don't know, years ago, and they were just telling us how they couldn't do this. There's too many things, blah, blah, blah. And so we pulled up a policy document, and it was a 10-page document. They said, well, here's all the different things. I said, well, it was just like open an account or something, right? It was like, what are they? Said, well, these are all the different exceptions of things that might happen while you're opening an account. I said, that's cool, but if we just set this one here and we set this one here, what's left? It was like a half page, open account, press submit. It's like they had built this, what I call built the knowledge architecture into the document, right? They thrust it all together. And they didn't realize, with this, back to the other poll, but the technologies we have today are able to let them break this stuff up, link it in interesting ways, show it in different combinations as they work, and still access the source document with all that stuff at one glance if they need it. So I think the thing that you have to think about, and I used to call this the sweet spot when we did taxonomy workshops, even back in the day when you and I worked together, maybe, the sweet spot is this. What you're trying to do, in support and service anyway, and maybe everybody, is there's 3 circles. One is, what do my customers want from information? What kind of information are they calling about? What are they asking about? Back to your thing about all the stuff we get questions on. Let's just ground ourselves in that as they understand it, not as we think of it. That's important. Okay. So I'm an insurance company. I make all these policies. They have to be complete and compliant. I don't care. I want to know what my customers ask about. They ask about these 25 things, not these 250 things. Second, how do they want to consume that information? This is this thing about this big complicated document. What's the optimal way? And this goes to self-service too. What's the easiest way, like you were saying with Fidelity? What's the way in which this could be consumed that would be acceptable to the business and efficient for the customer? And the third one is, what content do I have? I come up against this so often that they only want to talk about what content they have.
Yeah.
And I said, if your business is sinking, then you're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You're moving things around while you're not getting any better. So I try to really coach people toward thinking about that. And every time they ask about a category, well, is it something your customers want? Is it something that you can tell them how they're going to use it? Have you got stuff for it? And so maybe a bit of cheap guidance there for folks to think about it.
Yeah.
Back to the original question about technology versus business process, they go hand in glove. This is where I think agile thinking is super important. And KCS has kind of got a bit of this in it, which I think inherently is cool. The most passionate people I've seen at consortium events over the past decade are the people that figured this out on kind of an iterative journey. They went and tried something, and parts of it worked, parts of it failed. Then they tried something else, and they just tuned it in little by little over time. And there's something. This is and just to be quite honest, software companies aren't good at selling this methodology because they just want that license or subscription revenue. They don't want to work you into it. They don't have time for that. They got a quarterly earnings report. They need to know how much money you're going to spend and when. And so they're systemically not organized for this sort of swimming lesson, dive in the pool a little at a time thing. They want you to just jump in the pool, right? And so when you do that too fast, you end up with a scenario where the customer says, well, can you put this stuff in? Oh, yeah. And then we jam it all in. And now 2 years later, I can't find anything and it's hard to use. And so this, you're touching on something that's kind of a critical issue for me, which is the ideal scenario that you want to get to is to learn enough of the technology to be able to have that intelligent thought process about those 3 circles, and then try some of it and then see how that's behaving for you. Because now you've educated yourself a little bit on the technology, educated yourself a little bit on your content. Maybe you put that in front of a couple of users and see how that's fitting. And now you're on your way to really creating a method that you're sharing and enrolling your users in as you do it. So that's my thought on it.
Hey, one sort of follow-up question to that topic, and then I've got one last one if you've got just a few more minutes.
Sure.
You mentioned the importance of a good knowledge manager, and I totally agree. And I have people ask me all the time, like, to give them a job posting, for a good knowledge manager. And it's really hard to put in, a few bullet points that fit into a Taleo, posting or whatever.
You're
But
right.
what's your, a couple things you think are really interesting for a good knowledge manager that they don't teach in school? It's usually kind of a street smarts type of thing.
It's an interesting question because I also ran into this when you and I worked at eVersions together on what makes a good consultant. Let me just talk about that one, then I'll come to knowledge manager because the principles apply. When we were at eVersions, you and I think with about 80 people, eventually, maybe at most, like small but mighty little consultancy, right? I noticed a lot of people when I first came in that were real smart, like ex-Anderson Consulting, or I don't know if it was Accenture or whatever, they real savvy consultant types who'd work in consultant. And they didn't really know knowledge management so much. And they had these big models of how to do stuff that they slowly had to dumb down and simplify for the level of engagement we did. We could work with that. Then I actually built a team toward the end of that whole thing because we got bought by Kana, and then Kana got bought by Verint. So I still had a lot of those people around. Then I had a team of folks at one point doing them. And the other choice is to pick somebody who knows knowledge management, but they don't know consulting. And it's an interesting mix. There's no right answer, but I think I can teach the consulting bit to the knowledge management consultant better than I can teach the knowledge management experience. If you've only done consulting and you don't know about CAM, you don't have it in your blood, it's going to take you longer, a year, I would assert, to start learning these patterns. I got a new sales consultant in now, and she did a whole big knowledge management project somewhere. She's learning how to consult. Well, yeah, but she can already tell tons of stories. She can already connect with customers. She can already understand what their problems are. So let's talk about knowledge managers now. What do you need from a good knowledge manager? I think the same principle applies. I have seen no organization. I mean, people ask, who do I hire? Blah, blah. They always find someone. Knowledge geeks like you and I, knowledge zealots, are self-selecting. That in your organization, they notify themselves. They write additional content you didn't ask for. They give a bunch of feedback on your content, whether you ask for it or not. They're always making suggestions about how to improve where knowledge is. They've got their own stash. I remember AmandaNet. We went and talked to this big cable company, and they said, well, you need to talk to Amanda. And I said, okay, Amanda, what's going on with your knowledge tool? She goes, I don't know. I use AmandaNet. I went, what's that? She goes, well, I built my own knowledge base based on like Microsoft Word or some crap, because I couldn't navigate all that crap. And by the way, I've got my whole group here in Atlanta uses it. It's like, guess who became the knowledge manager, right? So for the whole company. So I think they're a self-selecting group. I think you will scare people away if you put too much in your job description. You start adding it up, and it's just ridiculous the number of things you need to know. And the people are like, who knows that? So, I mean, I'm making this up, Scott, but I mean, if I could do it today, I'd say I need someone who's passionate about creating and sharing knowledge to add as an asset to the company, and someone who's familiar with some knowledge creation tools and who is really good at collaborating with other people to expand that vision across the company.
Yeah.
Boom. Done.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's kind of like, the librarian analogy. We can all think back to, at least I can, school librarians, right? And there were some cases where, I don't know, maybe they didn't have a librarian for a couple months. And so they just asked somebody to fill in, and that person could take the book and go put it in the right stack based on the Dewey Decimal System. But that's not what being a librarian was about. The best librarian was somebody who, going back to some of the points we've talked about already, knew about who you were when they saw you walk in, and, knew what kind of, if there's 10 books on subject X, they know that you'll like these 3 because of the way it's written. Or the more ideal situation is they're recommending something to you that you hadn't possibly thought of because, they know, that your personality.
Well, maybe before you jump on that, I want to just one last comment on that. As I think about what I just told you about a good knowledge manager, the one place where this falls down is if the knowledge manager is so low level, they've not learned how to negotiate across the organization.
Totally agree.
I have a governance model the governance model I've landed on after years of trying these different things has a layer at the top called the executive committee, and it's got the knowledge manager, the director, knowledge director, toe with the other groups with self-service, the marketing, the website, the contact center, IT. Okay, there's a console like that. And then that same knowledge manager is down here working with the content authors, all the BI people. But the last bit I would add, the fourth quality, is the ability to manage up and across, because I've got some knowledge managers that are unsuccessful because they can't do that.
Yeah, totally agree.
A larger vision that to motivate executive leadership to make the changes that are needed. Okay.
Yeah, totally agree. That's great. So last question. What's the most extreme example where you've completely changed your mind on a topic related to knowledge management? It could have been yesterday, it could have been something that's happened over the last, 30, 40 years, but what's the most extreme example of what you've had a complete opinion shift on?
That's a good question. Complete opinion shift. I know there's one or two. There's got to be some. It's coming to me. Hold on. I remember thinking about, what's shifting for me now, and I never thought I'd get there, and it's hard for me, but is, I come from a consulting background. I mean, you and I met as consultants. I'm used to imbuing knowledge and holding a higher standard and trying to, and what I've had to learn is sort of reverse the perfect is the enemy of the good, back to that agile thinking. So I used to really think that you had to do all these practices, man, otherwise you're not going to make it. And maybe it's still true, but I've really gotten worked into a scenario where I realized that if I can't get my customers to attach to this thing from the outset in a way that they can handle mentally and with the resources they're given, I can't get any further anyway. I have to teach them how to doggy paddle before I get into the butterfly stroke. And so, I've really changed my thinking to the point of where now we're trying to figure out how to do what we call best practice as a feature. What can I put in my products that I used to have to teach you how to do on the business? Back to that technology business side, like, can I move the 75-25 over to 50-50 to where there's things that are happening in the content that help you automatically improve it, that help you think about tagging it in intelligent ways, that give you feedback on what to write dynamically, like not something you have to go out and figure out, big expertise. So I've changed, I've by necessity have been moved to this point of view, but I'm embracing it now because I want, it's like teaching the piano. I used to teach jazz piano. I mentioned early on, I joked about recovery, but I'm a very sophisticatedly educated guy. That's the good news. The bad news is I'm an educated guy. When I went to try to teach people piano, I gave them this whole scales and theory and stuff, and they were just overwhelmed. They could, and I learned after many, many years, teach them a song. Just get them to play a song. I bet your daughter comes down here, and if she plays anything on the guitar, she tries to play a song. She doesn't say, I'm going to play the C Mixolydian scale.
Yep.
So that's the thing I've changed my idea about. And it goes to the other things I've talked about earlier, which is show it to them, get them to feel it, put it in front of them. They need to touch it and understand it. So that's what I think I've changed my mind on that considerably. And by the way, it's kind of got me off of getting too elaborate with strategies like knowledge-centered service. Like, that's all good stuff. But when you go look at the verified specifications of 45 different things you're supposed to be doing, like, can we just write a song? I mean, we're going to write some. So there's a bit of overthink there. After 30 years of noodling on this strategy, you can come up with way more than anybody could do the first iteration. So I think there's some wisdom there. So that's can I ask you, what do you give me 1 of yours on that? Change your thinking.
So I'll give you another answer, but to +1 to yours, I suppose. I've gone through a somewhat similar process where, some of the early projects that I did around knowledge management were like in a regulated financial services environment where we had to do it a certain way. And so we couldn't really veer off of that. We had to do the whole thing, or else there's regulatory fines. And then when you and I first started working together, we were sort of working with the early adopters who, wanted to do the soup to nuts type of thing. But now flash forward, many years. And like you said, for a variety of reasons, you might just need to pull a couple low-hanging fruit and kind of do it iteratively. Maybe that's because in a different regulatory situation, they can't do all 10, of the best practices, or, it's a more transactional client that can only handle sliding one into their workflow. So I don't know that it's necessarily, I changed my mind about it, but I saw a change of pace or opinion or whatever as knowledge management became more widely adopted, which I think is a good thing. But yeah, hearing you describe that kind of makes me yearn for one of the good old days projects, right? Where we can do like, that slide that you used to have where you go through the different phases of it. Cause it's like anything in life. One thing that you think might be your biggest struggle, 6 months later, you look back on it and you're like, gosh, that really helped us improve as a person or as a organization. I'd say the biggest thing that I've changed my mind about specific to knowledge management is really, it happened quite a while ago, maybe 2005. And it was kind of two things that relate to the same core topic. One is I thought I was doing a great job on a project, and then the executive sponsor came in and basically yelled at everybody and said, hey, y'all changed the project to be from something that helps my 4,000 agents shave a second or two from each call, which over time adds up to millions of dollars, to you made it all about the admins and the authors. Well, guess who I worked with every day? The admins and the authors. I visited the call center, but I wasn't there every single day. So I thought I was doing a great job on one of my first consulting projects. But then I realized, she's right. It's nothing against us admins and authors, but we have to keep the bigger picture in mind. And so I constantly remind my team that whether it's in the sales cycle or the day before go live, what is the real problem we're trying to solve? It's usually about the direct interface with the customer, which not only impacts CSAT, but also cost savings. Whereas, it's very easy as a customer success manager or any type of role to fall into other tangential things that feel good and seem like they're going to produce something, but without that other aspect, it means nothing. And then the second one on a more positive note is, I'd done so many projects where we did everything right. We were under budget, on time, all this sort of thing, but the adoption and the success measures just weren't there. So I remember it was at Avaya. They had maybe a college intern who was a videographer and like kind of a marketing type of person. And they were walking by one day and kind of overheard us talking about this project and wanted to get involved. And initially I'm like, we have no use for like a marketing person, right? But it's probably the most successful launch I've ever observed, because going back to the story you told earlier, they went and videoed that sort of old grumpy dude who didn't want to do this knowledge base. He knew everything, but they videoed him with one camera on his computer screen and another camera on his face. And something impressed him, right? And his face just lit up. And it's like when everybody, this wasn't his name, right? But sees grumpy old Roger, with this smile on his face. Well, gosh, I want to get my hands on that platform. And then they did things like having the little marketing flair, like the little squish balls, right? That they handed out to everybody. And it just made the launch have a pizzazz that really helped it be successful. Yeah, you looked like you may have reached for something like this.
I got a squeezy brain.
Yeah, exactly.
Knowledge. Grab a hold of knowledge.
I try to get all of my clients to do something like that. Not everybody has the advantage of having some free interns around to do that. And I think it goes beyond knowledge management, right? But everything in life that people need to be marketed to as to why they should pay attention and what it's going to do for them. Otherwise, it could be the greatest thing for them, but if they don't pick it up and give it a try, it's a moot point.
I have a customer with that problem now. Well, I know we're coming up against the hour and a half here, but I want to give you one more of these that I haven't settled on, but it's a provocative thing that maybe we can discuss with a group sometime. It's the center of the bullseye. Do we really need to curate content? So Matt Seaman, the current executive director of the consortium, gave a presentation before he was elected director at I think it was in Seattle, so I attended it in person, where he talked about AI's ability to detect content trends across lots of different objects and pick out selected snippets to recreate content. Lots of people are talking about this right now, but it goes against the grain of everything you and I have ever done around, well, it's all about curation, and KCS is about dynamic curation and about facilitated expansion, dynamic expansion. But at the heart of it is this idea that a human being authors knowledge. And so there are AI companies out there already touting that you don't need to do this silly thing, but it's a really provocative question. How far can you go? And if I end up on the other side of that, I find myself being slowly thinking and opening the Pandora's box to like, maybe I don't need to have a human do everything. Right now, I've sort of ended up in sort of the obvious place, semi-assisted. Okay, sure, gather me some stuff, but then let the curated expert figure out what to do with it. Right? That's a nice place to be right now. But check back with me in 2027. I may tell you that I'm now an advocate of automated knowledge creation. If you can do the things that we've been talking about to understand everything the company is asked about already, and you can do some of this dynamic content AI modeling, you would be able to get 80% of the way there, right?
Yeah.
So
no, I think it's really interesting. My current opinion is that all companies should let their customers edit the content. We do it on Wikipedia, right? Like nobody goes to the Britannica Encyclopedia anymore. They go to Wikipedia, where the edit even to Joe Biden or Donald Trump's, life history was made by, Motorhead 82 or whatever. If that model can be trusted, then surely we can let the gal with a electrical engineering degree who deploys Brocade products at Chase Bank edit the knowledge base article because she caught an update to it. So yeah, no, that's interesting. I was just reading a story the other day about AI generated content, and by the fourth paragraph it said, it's not that bad because the first 3 paragraphs of this story were written by an AI tool. And I would have never known.
Send me that one, man. Well,
Yeah,
okay, man. Well, this has been fun. Let's have a session where we talk about the future. I'll bring my crystal ball.
Well, thanks so much, John. I really appreciate it. This is the first one, and I'm excited to do some more. And I'll continue having the group ones as well, so we can all get together.
Thanks for helping build KM community. It's much needed.
Yeah, thanks so much. Have a good night, man.
Take care, brother. Bye-bye.
See ya.